everybody. Welcome back to Hauntflix Horrors, the place where nightmares come to life. If you love spine-chilling tales that send shivers down your spine, you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button for more terrifying stories that will keep you up at night. Are you ready to be scared? Because the darkness is waiting. Let's dive in. It was the last weekend of October, and Halloween was falling on a Saturday this year. The excitement in the air was undeniable, especially for my mom, who always went all out for the holiday. For her, decorating and giving out candy was almost a competition with the neighbors. She wanted our house to be the one everyone remembered, the ultimate trick-or-treating destination. We live in a small town in Oregon, at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac, so every year we had to decorate not just the front of our house, but also the side that faced the street. This year, the weather wasn't cooperating. It was cold, overcast, and there was rain in the forecast. Despite this, kids started trick-or-treating earlier in the day, probably trying to beat the rain. But after a few skipped our house, my mom was convinced it was because we didn't have enough decorations out to catch their attention. I tried to tell her it was just the weather, but she insisted we bring out more decorations from the attic. Reluctantly, I agreed. The attic is right above my bedroom, with a pull-down ladder in the upstairs hallway. I climbed up to grab the last few Halloween bins. As I moved one of the containers toward the attic door, I heard a faint creaking noise from the far end of the attic, like wood snapping under pressure. I looked in the direction of the sound, but didn't see anything out of place. I figured it was just the old attic settling. After bringing down the decorations, my mom and I put up a few more spooky props in the yard. But the wind was picking up, and the sky looked ready to pour at any moment. As the day went on, the number of trick-or-treaters dwindled, and by evening, the rain had arrived. My mom, disappointed that her carefully prepared treat bags weren't getting handed out, went back inside, leaving me in my room playing video games. That's when I heard the noise again, a crack from above, in the attic. It was the second time that day, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind or the storm. The night grew darker. The rain turned into a full-on downpour, and a thunderstorm rolled in. Perfect Halloween weather, I thought, as I kept gaming late into the night. Sometime past midnight, as the storm raged outside, I heard something new. This time, it sounded like footsteps. I paused my game, listening intently. It seemed to be coming from the attic again. At first, I thought my mom might be up there putting things away, but it was so late, and I hadn't heard anyone climb the attic ladder. The more I listened, the clearer it became. Those were definitely footsteps. I cautiously stepped out into the hallway, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw the attic door slightly ajar. That's when I heard movement downstairs in the kitchen, like someone rummaging through the fridge. A wave of panic washed over me. I tiptoed to my parents' room and shook my dad awake, whispering that someone was in the house. He jolted up and grabbed the small wooden bat he kept under his bed. My dad carefully peeked out into the hallway, then hurried back into the room. He whispered that he saw someone climbing back into the attic. My mom, now awake, was visibly shaken, but we tried to stay calm. Dad locked the bedroom door and immediately called 911. The minutes felt like hours as we waited, listening for any more sounds. The police arrived quickly, and after my dad quietly let them in, they went straight up to the attic. It didn't take long before they found someone hiding there. It was a disheveled-looking man, huddled in a corner behind the boxes of decorations. He wasn't aggressive, just frightened. He told the officers that he had wandered into the house when he saw the front door open the previous afternoon. He had no place to stay, so he made himself comfortable in our attic, even bringing one of our blankets and a jar of peanut butter up with him. Though he looked rough and the situation was terrifying, the man seemed more desperate than dangerous. My parents, shaken but relieved no one was harmed, decided not to press charges. They just wanted him out and hoped he'd get the help he needed. It's been months since that Halloween, but the thought of someone silently living above us, moving around while we were unaware, still creeps me out. We're a lot more careful about locking the doors now, and I doubt I'll ever look at the attic the same way again. I've never been a huge fan of Halloween, to be honest. The costumes, the decorations, the over-the-top displays. It always felt like people were trying too hard to get a scare. But this year, something happened that changed how I look at the holiday forever. It all started when I was house-sitting for my aunt. She lived in this old Victorian house at the edge of town, the kind of place that looked haunted even in broad daylight. She was going on a last-minute trip with some friends and asked me to stay there over the weekend to take care of the house and her dog Max. I figured it would be an easy way to make some extra cash, so I agreed. I arrived on Halloween afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to set. The sky was a dull gray, and the wind whipped through the trees, making the dry, fallen leaves skitter across the ground. Max was happy to see me, wagging his tail as he greeted me at the door, but even he seemed uneasy, glancing around nervously. The house was just as I remembered. Creaky wooden floors, heavy curtains that always seemed to block out the light, and an eerie, unsettling quiet that hung in the air. My aunt had left a bowl of candy by the front door for trick-or-treaters, though she told me not to expect many. Kids don't come out this way much anymore, she had said with a laugh. Not since the rumors. I didn't ask what she meant by that at the time. I should have. The first hour was uneventful. I lounged on the couch, scrolling through my phone while Max slept at my feet. The wind outside had picked up, and I could hear the distant rumbles of thunder. I glanced out the window, expecting to see rain at any moment, but the sky was still dry, just darker now. Then the doorbell rang. I jumped, not expecting any trick-or-treaters, especially with the storm looming. I grabbed the candy bowl and opened the door, but no one was there. The porch was empty. I stepped outside, looking up and down the street, but there wasn't a single person in sight. Just the wind, howling through the trees, and the leaves blowing in small, swirling circles. I chalked it up to kids playing pranks. You know how Halloween is. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat down again. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps coming from upstairs. I froze. Max, who had been sleeping, shot up, ears perked, growling low in his throat. My heart started pounding in my chest. The house was old, sure, but those footsteps weren't the sound of creaking floors. Someone was walking upstairs. "Hello?" I called out, but my voice sounded weak. There was no answer, just silence. Max began barking, staring toward the staircase, and I felt a chill creep down my spine. I grabbed my phone, but when I checked it, the battery had suddenly drained to 0. It was fully charged just moments ago. The footsteps started again, this time heavier, slower, like someone was deliberately pacing above me. I stared at the ceiling, the thumping growing louder, and for the first time, I noticed the faintest sound of something else. A whisper, barely audible, as if someone was talking just out of earshot. I stood up, heart racing, and grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a fireplace poker. Slowly, I made my way to the base of the stairs. Max stayed at my side, still growling. The house was dark, too dark, and I cursed myself for not turning on more lights earlier. The stairs creaked as I ascended, each step making my stomach churn with dread. As I reached the top, I saw it. The door to the attic was slightly open. I knew it had been shut when I arrived. My aunt never went up there. She said it was full of junk and old memories she didn't want to dig through. I stood there, staring at the door. The footsteps had stopped. The whispering, too. The silence was deafening, but it felt like something was waiting for me behind that door. I don't know why I did it. Curiosity, maybe, or sheer stupidity. But I pushed the attic door open. The smell hit me first, damp, musty air, like the place hadn't been touched in years. The light was dim, but as I stepped inside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the corner, was a figure, a woman, her back to me, sitting on an old, rotting chair. Her long, tangled hair hung down her back, and her clothes were tattered and covered in dirt. She was hunched over, like she hadn't moved in ages. "Ma'am?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't move, didn't make a sound. I took a cautious step closer, gripping the fireplace poker tightly. Max whimpered behind me, his tail tucked between his legs. That's when she started to turn her head, slowly, unnaturally slow, until I could just make out her face. Pale, sunken eyes, and a twisted, toothy smile that sent a jolt of terror through my body. I didn't wait. I bolted down the stairs, Max following right behind me. I grabbed my keys, threw open the front door, and didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I sped off, not daring to look back at that house. When I finally got home, I called my aunt to tell her what happened. She went quiet for a long time before finally speaking. "You went into the attic?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I told you never to go up there." "I didn't know," I stammered. "Why? Who was that?" She hesitated before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not possible," she said. "No one should be in the attic. My grandmother, she died up there, years ago." To this day, I refuse to go near that house. I don't know who or what I saw that night, but I'll never forget the feeling of pure, paralyzing fear when she turned to look at me. I never believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, ghouls, and all the Halloween tales were just stories to scare kids, or so I thought. But last Halloween changed everything. It started out as a normal night. I wasn't even planning to go out. I had a few movies lined up, and some leftover candy I hadn't gotten around to handing out. The streets outside were crowded with trick-or-treaters, but by 9 p.m., most of them had headed home, leaving the streets empty and eerily quiet. That's when I heard the knock. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was some last-minute kids, but it came again, louder this time. 3 knocks, slow, and deliberate. I reluctantly got up and opened the door. No one was there. A cold gust of wind rushed into the house, sending a chill down my spine. I stepped outside, scanning the street. Nothing. No kids. No footsteps echoing in the distance. Just the stillness of the night. Feeling unsettled, I shut the door and double-locked it, laughing at myself for being so paranoid. But the moment I turned around, I froze. Something wasn't right. My house, which I knew like the back of my hand, suddenly felt foreign, like I had walked into someone else's home. The air felt heavy. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker, deeper. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to me like a cold sweat. That's when I heard it. A whisper, faint, but unmistakable. It came from the far corner of the living room, where a tall grandfather clock stood. I told myself it was just my imagination, that it was nothing but the creaking of the old house. But then it came again, clearer this time. Come closer. Asterisk. I stood there, heart pounding, unable to move. The room was colder now, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward me, like dark fingers curling around the edges of the furniture. Against my better judgment, I walked toward the clock. Every step felt wrong, like I was walking deeper into a nightmare. The whispering continued, soft, urgent, pulling me closer. As I reached the clock, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A small, crumpled piece of paper tucked behind it. My hand trembled as I pulled it out. The paper was old, yellowed with age, and covered in strange symbols. But there, scrawled in the center, were the words, "He is watching." Suddenly, the clock's hands began to spin wildly, faster and faster, ticking loudly in a way that rattled my bones. My heart raced as I stumbled backward, and then everything stopped. The clock, the ticking, the whispers, silence. That's when I felt it, a presence behind me. Cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. Standing in the middle of the room was a figure cloaked in shadow. Tall, faceless. Its form was indistinct, like smoke, shifting in the dim light. But the eyes, oh God, the eyes. 2 pinpoints of glowing red, staring at me, through me. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But I could feel its intent. A deep, malevolent hunger, as if it had been waiting for this moment. I backed away, my mind racing for a way out. But the moment I tried to run, the doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. The lights flickered, casting the shadow figure into strange, distorted shapes on the walls. Panicking, I grabbed my phone, but the screen was dead. No signal, no power. Nothing but the cold, suffocating darkness and the creature in front of me. It started moving, slowly at first, gliding across the floor toward me. My legs refused to work, paralyzed by fear. I could hear whispers again, a chorus of voices, growing louder, angrier, as if they were coming from inside my head. The figure was close now, its shadowy form reaching out, almost touching me. And then it spoke, not in whispers this time, but in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You let me in." Asterisk, I screamed, stumbling backward, trying to get away. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls shrinking, the air thick with dread. The figure loomed over me, its shadow enveloping everything, suffocating me in darkness. I don't know how I did it, but I managed to crawl toward the door. My hand found the doorknob, twisting it with every ounce of strength I had left. The door flew open, and I tumbled out into the cold night air. Everything was normal outside. The street was empty, the house is quiet. But when I turned back, my house wasn't the same. The windows were dark. The once warm glow from the living room now, a cold, hollow void. I didn't go back inside. I couldn't. I spent the rest of the night in my car, staring at the house, waiting for something, anything, to move. But it was as if the house had gone to sleep. Or maybe, just maybe, the thing inside was waiting. Halloween isn't just stories. It's not just harmless fun. Something ancient, something dark, lurks behind the veil, waiting for someone foolish enough to let it in. And I did. I've moved since then. A new city,